Hi,
Hi.
welcome back. I quit Honkai Star Rail a few months ago before 3.2 because I was disappointed in the direction the game was going, and despite a few character reworks being in the works at the time, I still didn't care because it was too little too late. The 3.4 update livestream was today though, and a lot of people are really excited about Honkai Star Rail right now, especially because of three things. The fake collab, the reworks for Jingliu, Blade, Kafka, and Silverwolf finally coming out, and of course, the skip button. So, is it finally time to flow water under the bridge and go back to Honkai Star Rail, or is the state of this game a lot more complicated than just a couple of weak characters and a bad story? Before we get into it, just make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this in the future, and join the Express Run Discord server for a fun and lovely community to hang out with, and for pictures of my cat. Now let's get onto it. So obviously the elephant in the room, the skip button, is one of the most important things they've ever added to this game, and it's definitely the main thing that's making me reconsider my stance about playing the game or not, aside from my channel obviously dying and needing a main game to play again. It was something the game desperately needed because most players really don't like the story, even lore enthusiasts complaining about it, and if you want to argue about the skip button at all, then I suggest watching my friend Axe's video about it. He basically summarized every reason why the skip button is a necessary addition. Basically, if you don't think the skip button is necessary, you're kinda stupid. Okay, I'm joking, but it's definitely a selfish and uninformed take. The story was not the reason why I quit the game though, it was definitely a huge factor, but I don't really care about story that much anyway. If it's good, I'll enjoy it, and if it's not, I'll skip through it. The skip button helps with that. What I do care about is the state of the gameplay. Power creep, endgame content, character kits, and all that stuff. That's what I care about. All of these three, and everything that relates to these three, still sucks. So, the kit buffs to the four characters we mentioned earlier are mostly fine. The characters are a lot more competent now, which is what's really important. Silverwolf is now finally better than Pella, but still worse than Jiaocho. Blade at E1-S1 is comparable to my day. Kafka definitely got the strongest buff, and since DOT is my favorite archetype, I'm actually really glad for that. And the only one that I would say got a bad buff is Jingliu. Not only because she got the weakest buff out of the four, but also because you have to completely change her build to play her, since now most of her previous light cone and relic options are completely useless on her because of her new HP scaling. The characters being buffed is good and all, but I also know that these buffs are not going to last. Sure, they are now a lot more competitive than before, especially Blade and Kafka, but they're just going to get power crept again, along with all 3.x units by the time 4.x comes around. How do I know that? Pattern recognition. If you're somehow still coping about 4.x not having insanely overpowered units, then you're very optimistic, and I admire that. However, let me knock you down back to reality for a second and tell you that every time we said this character is now the strongest in the game, a couple updates later a new character came out and knocked them out of the park. It's going to happen again. If it doesn't, I will gladly eat my words and I would actually look forward to reinstalling Honkai Star Rail, but for now I'm not optimistic about it. F2P players can still clear the game, it's just that if you want to use older units, it gets increasingly harder, and yes, even with the buffs, like I said, they'll just get power crept later on and need buffs again. It could be an endless cycle of characters needing buffs again and again, but if you're fine with that, then whatever. But I myself don't enjoy a game with healer characters that can deal damage comparable to a character that used to be the best DPS unit in the game. I also don't like it when I have to see my favorite character getting weaker and weaker and weaker for a whole year before there's a chance of them getting a buff. Power creep will forever go on, and Saber, Archer, and Finon also prove that. Saber is a really freaking strong character. Archer is the best hunt unit, and I really appreciate when Zila and Fei Xiao users get cucked like that, when you could have always just made a power ceiling, but hey, no need to cross bridges we already have at this point. I do appreciate Archer reviving Sparkle, but the power creep outweighs that in my opinion. The third character, Finon, however, is not only strong but also has another problem. His kit is really bad. Don't get me wrong, he does good damage, his kit itself is just really incomplete, and it's basically the same thing we've seen over and over and over again with multiple characters, like Maida and Glea especially, where their kit is super incomplete and has massive flaws until you get their eidolons, because the devs basically created a problem in the kit and sold you a solution in the form of light cones, eidolons, or simply other characters. Finon's kit is basically very hyper-specific, and that's a problem for two reasons. One is because when you get a character for him, the character cannot make any other characters stronger, and that's not really very F2P friendly. And two is because he simply doesn't have a lot of characters that work with him, and that's also not very F2P friendly. unlike characters in the past like Robin and Ruame that were very generalist, and that's what I would consider a good character design. Except to make it a little better for a good game state as well, I would make them slightly weaker. Support units, especially in a game like Honkai Star Rail that relies on supports way more than DPS units, should have equal value, and with characters like Phylon existing, supports don't have equal value. E0 units should also have equal value, and that's obviously not the case in Honkai Star Rail, not only because of power creep, but also because of units like Acheron, Maide, and Aglaia that require Eidolons or Lycos to function without issue. Again, don't get me wrong, Phylon as well as Aglaia and Maide are all really strong. In fact, all 3.x units are probably at around the same power level right now when you have their full teams, with maybe Castries and Herda being a level or so above Maide and Aglaia, but they're more or less equal. A lot of people use that as some sort of evidence that power creep doesn't exist, but like I said earlier, they're going to get power crept in 4.x, with 4.x units being close in power to each other and a leap or two better than previous updates' characters. My prediction for 4.x is as follows. All 3.x units will be outclassed and go down to T1 or T1.5 consistently, with a few 2.x units finally getting their kits buffed or reworked to get them back up to par for a while, with the 1.x units that got buffed also going back down with 3.x units, and that cycle will just keep going on and on. I don't know how many times a single unit will get buffed though, that remains to be seen. I was kinda hoping for them to announce some more buffs for other characters that are lacking, like Dan Hung-Il, Sparkle, Dr. Ratio, and Argenti, which would have actually given me a lot of hope that maybe they're finally gonna make most characters equal and introduce a power ceiling, but I don't think that's happening. Another problem that still exists is the 4-star problem. Moza is still the last banner 4-star to be introduced, and that's really weird for a gacha game to only be introducing 5-star units without consideration for lower rarities. There are so many characters that could have been 4 stars without issue, like Tribi, Hyacine, and Mr. Reika, who still isn't out by the way, but at this point will probably be a 5-star too. Some people will definitely push back on that, saying that they want their favorite units to be 5 stars instead of 4 stars, but your feelings don't really matter here because we're discussing simple game balance, and those units would have been completely fine as 4-star units. Of course, only ever releasing 5 stars gets really boring really quickly because obviously the only real progress one can have is just getting the new 5-star unit instead of maybe getting a 4-star and exploring a niche team comp, or exploring a 4-star being used to substitute another 5-star unit that they don't have. But that's not really happening here because HSR is only releasing 5 stars still without a sign of stopping because 3.5 also still only has 5-star units. 4-star units bring balance, variety, and simply a lot more fun. Not having them is really ass. Finally, the state of the endgame content is still the same as ever, heavily shilling the newest units and screwing over everybody else, and I don't like that. So with all that being said, the only thing I really view positively about 3.4 is the skip button, but even though it's a really good thing, everything else that we talked about just heavily outweighs it, and I just don't really want to go back to Star Rail until at least the 4-star issue and the power ceiling issue are both addressed and show signs of being fixed. Like I said, the buffs are cool, but power creep doesn't really care, because 4.x will still just be a leap above 3.x characters and the characters that received the buff. If you're fine with the meta shifting like that every year or so, then go ahead and play Honkai Star Rail, all power to you, but I myself don't really like seeing my favorite units getting weaker and weaker until they have a chance of getting buffed, just like I said earlier. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts and if you'll go back to Honkai Star Rail yourself. And make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this in the future, and join the Express Friend Discord server for a fun and lovely community to hang out with about gaming, anime, and pictures of my cat. Thank you again for watching, and I will see you next time.